Okay, here we are, back on the Republic. Um, in the last video, I told you about Glaucon's challenge, so now I'm going to start on Socrates' response to the challenge. Socrates' response to the challenge is bizarre. Like, once you cut through a whole bunch of really weird stuff, it becomes very clear and I think very insightful. That's the whole reason to teach this. But along the way, you gotta absorb some really weird stuff. The weirdest, although it won't seem the weirdest, if you do read the entirety of the Republic, which I haven't assigned to you, but if you read the entirety of the Republic, you come across like things as weird as sex lotteries. I'm not making that up. And not just any sex lotteries, rigged sex lotteries, where the state rigs a lottery, the result of which decides who you have sex with. This only applies to a small number of people. Basically, Plato invented eugenics in the process of writing the Republic, and he came up with this plan for the smartest people to be bred with the smartest people to make even smarter people. He also, in the process of the Republic, just kind of offhand invents racism. Racism wasn't really a thing in Greece. They definitely had negative views of outsiders, but didn't break down along racial lines. It broke down on cultural lines, effectively. And so Plato just like invents the idea of racism as a form of social control, or invents the idea that there are biological classes within human beings, different classes of people that's determined by who their ancestors were and by some hidden element within them. But he makes explicit, like, this is a lie, and it's only useful for social control, but it's just made up. It's to trick people into doing something that is otherwise good for them, but that they don't understand why, so they have to tell them a stupid lie. Racism. But that's not the weirdest thing. Those are on the surface the weirdest thing. But for one thing, they only come from, or they have their source in, a really weird thing that Plato has Socrates say immediately after Glaucon's challenge. Immediately after Glaucon's challenge, Socrates starts talking about how they'll do a better job of figuring out what justice is and why it's good if they look at the nature of a city. And he makes this like really weird, not very good argument, or not even really an argument. He just sort of asserts that because in general it's easier to aim at something that is larger than at something that's smaller, it will be easier to see justice in the city than it will be to see justice in a human being. So we'll figure out what justice is like in the city, or in other words, they'll figure out what's necessary to create just political institutions, and then they'll use that as a guide for what is necessary to create a just person. Because you have to know what a just person is before you can know whether and in what way justice benefits you. So you've got this book that is ostensibly a book of ethics, right? The organizing question around which the Republic is sort of constructed is what makes justice worthwhile? What reason do we have to be just? Why is justice good for us? Right? All versions of the same question. And even before you get to that question, because that's the question that Glaucon and Adeimantus pose in Book 2, even before that, the topic was justice. And justice here as the individual virtue of human beings, not politics. But starting in Book 2, Plato's going to have sort of this two-track thing going on. He's going to have the political philosophy line, right? He's going to be saying things about political philosophy. So what kinds of institutions and what kinds of social relations are good? So there's that track of the book. And then there's the ethics track of the book. And they run parallel to each other from this point on. In the process of talking about political philosophy, he's also going to branch off and have some of the most famous passages in the history of philosophy on metaphysics and epistemology. Metaphysics is the study of the most fundamental things, categories, forces, maybe, in the universe, and epistemology is the study of knowledge itself. And you can almost imagine that what was going on is Plato was like, I want to write my magnum opus, my greatest. Of course, magnum opus is Latin, so he wouldn't have said magnum opus, but he would like, I'm ready to write my great work, the work I'll be remembered for. What should it be on? And like on the one hand, he's like, well, it should be on ethics. That's what Socrates was interested in. I should write on ethics. But then on the other hand, he's like, yeah, but political philosophy would also be really good because I've got a lot of things to say about that. And then he's like, well, but metaphysics and epistemology is what I'm best at. So he just tried to squeeze them all together into one book. And he does so with this bizarre city and soul analogy, right? The city and soul analogy. The idea that justice in the soul will be like justice in the city. This is never argued for. He only has this like weird metaphor about largeness, right? The larger the thing is, the easier it is to aim at. But that clearly breaks down in this case. It's not like doing a full inquiry into the nature of the just city is going to make it easier to find what justice in the soul is. So my own pet theory is just that Plato had a bunch of insights he wanted to make, and this was a way he could shoehorn them all in together. A lot of people spend a lot of time writing about the city and soul analogy and how good it is and what reasons there are to believe it. And I think the thing to say is it's a dramatic device so he can squeeze all these things into one conversation. That said, there are a lot of interesting things going on in the political philosophy portion of the book. We're not going to focus on it except insofar as we think it's likely, or as I think it's likely, that things he's saying about political philosophy bear on things he says about ethics. Sometimes he highlights these. Sometimes he makes very clear that this is what's going on, that they've gotten a result in political philosophy and now they're going to apply it to ethics. And sometimes he gets results in political philosophy and he doesn't ever talk about what the implications for ethics are. But we're going to take a look at this. So it starts out with a description of the best city. And the best city, according to Socrates, is poor and sort of homogeneous. It is so poor that no one would invade it because there's nothing to steal. And this means that no one has to be a professional soldier in this city. In the truly just city, everyone would be content with having what they need to survive, right, and live healthy lives. And beyond that, they need not do any work. Beyond that, they're all free to do whatever they please. And there's no requirements for most of the things that go along with the state. Because there's no risk of being invaded, because your countryside is so poor that no great power is going to want it, you don't need an army. And one of Plato's key insights, an insight that gets overlooked a lot, even by contemporary political philosophers, is that one of the central problems of political philosophy is what you do once you have a military. Right? Because once you have a military, effectively speaking, the military has the power. So the way this goes is, Socrates says, look, the best city would be one where everyone is effectively equal in wealth, because everyone is effectively equally poor, but their poverty is just a matter of them only having what they need to live healthy lives. And beyond that, there's no restrictions on them. They work a little bit each day to get enough to survive, and that's it, right? And we all help each other live healthy lives. But Glaucon and Adimantus are like, no, this is the city of pigs, right? This is not worthy of human beings. And Socrates never actually agrees with them. Socrates never says, oh yeah, you're right. This city of equality, this city of poverty, this city of sort of maximal freedom and really no standing public institutions. This city, he never admits that it's bad. Plato in fact has him say, well, if you'd ask me, this would remain the best city, right? This is my answer. But once Glaucon and Adeimantus say, no, we want luxury, we want good food, we want nice clothes, right? We want arts, we want the sciences, we want all these things. Plato says, well, okay, if you're going to have those things, you need some source of wealth. Your city needs to generate enough wealth to do that. This is a good insight. You can't have all those things without wealth. You need enough surplus wealth to support all these people who specialize in things that people don't actually need. But because everyone's needs still need to be met, right, that means you have to create the stuff people need to survive plus a lot more in order to support all these people who are doing things that, while nice, are not in the strictest sense necessary. So now you're a wealthy city, which means now you need to protect that wealth. And to protect that wealth, you need a military. Right, so let's actually, over here, we start out with the city of pigs. That's what Glaucon and Adeimantus call it. What Socrates calls it is the healthy city. Glaucon and Adeimantus want luxuries, and so there's a transfer to the wealthy city. Which Socrates sometimes calls the fevered city. And the problem, the immediate problem with the wealthy city, is that you need a military to defend the wealth necessary to produce the luxuries. And once you have a military, you face the problem of how you stop the military from hurting the people in the city itself. Right? Socrates points out the military is somewhat like a dog. You want a dog to attack strangers, but you always have to worry about the dog attacking you. So you have to train the dog. Right? How do you train the dog? How do you get a military class that is devoted to defending the city, but not abusing the people within the city? Now, one way you could handle this is the way most Greek city-states at the time handled it. You could have everybody be in the military. You could have a non-professional military. This is what Athens did. Socrates was a war hero precisely because all Athenian men were expected to take part in the military. Okay. But Plato rejects that. Plato says, well, if we're going to have a military, we need specialists. Plato is maybe the first person to, in writing, recognize that specialization, that division of labor and specialization leads to greater production, right? That if you want a great military, you need people to focus on being military or soldiers. If you want great shoes, you need people to focus on making shoes, right? If you want great anything, you have to have people who make that their whole job. And so because of that, if we're going to have a military, we need a professional military class. We need people whose whole job is the military. But then effectively they have all the power. And so the question is, how do you stop those people who are only really good at fighting from also ruling? Right? And that is where the whole complex apparatus of the so-called beautiful city, or the Kallipolis, comes from. Kallipolis comes from the Greek word for, one of the Greek words for beauty, which is tokalon. We're going to talk about that more, both with Plato and with Aristotle. So the beautiful city. So the problem that the city of pigs had was lack of luxuries. And the problem that the wealthy city has is controlling the military. Now, before we get into the answer to how the beautiful city, the Kallipolis, will control the military and prevent the military leaders from taking over the city, I want to talk a little bit about the city of pigs. Because what Plato's eventually going to do is say, okay, the way that the Kallipolis is going to work is we're going to have a class structure within society, and the military is going to be not at the top of that class structure. And we're going to create a whole cultural system designed to reinforce that class structure. We're going to manipulate everything everyone hears. We're going to change the stories and the myths that they're told. We're going to rigorously educate them. We're going to create this myth about racism. We're going to have a eugenics program, all to reinforce this class system so that the military obeys essentially the philosopher kings. Right? Okay, so I'll get to that. He's going to take that class system and he's going to interpret or sort of read that into the soul. So that's where the city and soul analogy comes up again. He's going to get a political result. He's going to say what we need is a three-class system. And he's going to say, okay, so that means the soul should have three parts as well. But before he ever gets there, he says the best city would be the city of pigs. Or, as Socrates would have called it, the healthy city. And he never draws the parallel with the human soul. Right? So what would be the parallel with the human soul of the healthy city? Right? Well, the healthy city is characterized by a lack of desire for luxuries. The healthy city is characterized by only having desires for that which you truly need, and then is characterized by freedom. Right? Otherwise, so you have desires that are very easy to meet, because after all, the healthy city can meet all the desires of its citizens without being wealthy, without having any complex political institutions. So you have a bunch of desires that are easy to meet. In an individual human person, that would be just the desires for enough food, to live a healthy life, enough shelter to, keep yourself alive and healthy, and nothing more, right? And then the healthy city, other than that, other than what is necessary to meet the basic needs of its citizens, everybody is just sort of left free and at peace. So freedom and peace are bought through having minimal desires. And if this sounds familiar, it should. This is a perennially attractive view to a lot of people. There's versions of Buddhism which endorse this view, that the key to peace and freedom and a harmonious life is to desire as little as possible, to restrict your desires to only that which you need, and to stop desiring things that are difficult to get, stop desiring things the pursuit of which and brings all sorts of complications into your life. Now, Plato was probably not aware of Buddhism. Buddhism already existed by Plato's time. And there were some cultural contacts between India and Greece, but they were comparatively minor because the Persian Empire was in between them. And so even if there was influence from India on Greece, Plato would have probably been unaware of it. Plato never, as far as anyone knows, went to India or even into the Persian Empire to any significant degree. And so it's unlikely that Plato knew about Buddhism. But there was a school of thought at the time called Cynicism. Cynicism comes from the Greek word for dog, kainos or something like that. It was a name given to a group of people who all the other Greeks thought lived like dogs. The cynics, cynicism now means someone who takes like a really dim view of everything and looks for the bad and the evil in everyone and everything. But originally what it meant was a group of people who decided that human beings, in order to be truly happy, in order to be truly free, needed to stop desiring anything that was not, strictly speaking, necessary, and to value only one thing, and that was virtue. And so the cynics would disregard all sorts of social conventions. The cynics would walk around naked in the summertime because they'd be like, well, we don't need clothes in the summertime. It's Greece. It's hot, right? So we're going to walk around naked. They would disregard social conventions about rank, right? So they would not show respect to the wealthy. They would not engage in common religious activities and things like that. And this is why other Greeks said they lived like dogs. They would just sleep on the ground whenever they got tired, those kinds of things. But what the Cynics believed in, the Cynics, by the way, came from the founder of that school was a student of Socrates's, called, not Aristippus. Aristippus founded the Cyrenaics. I'm going to stop the video so I can find who it is. It was Antisthenes. sure you were dying to know that. The reason I felt like I needed to find it was I've actually created characters in MMOs named after ancient Greek philosophers, and one of them was named Antisthenes, and so I was embarrassed I didn't know it. It's a weird thing to be embarrassed about. But Antisthenes was another student of Socrates's who took Socrates's views and developed them in a very different way from Plato's, or in a different direction than Plato actually did. But there's some suggestion. So he founded the Cynics, and basically said the only thing that's of any value is virtue. So once you've done enough to meet all your natural human needs, the only thing you should care about is cultivating virtue in yourself, and you shouldn't care about anything else. No social conventions, certainly no luxuries or anything like that. You shouldn't want to dress up in fancy clothes. You shouldn't want to eat fancy foods. You shouldn't want to impress fancy people. And it could be that what Plato's telling us, or expressing some admiration for, is the Cynic lifestyle, because that's what seems to be the parallel with the City of Pigs, is a path towards living the good life where you just don't want anything anymore. It also fits with something that happens towards the beginning of the Republic that I didn't have you read because it's in Book 1, where that old man Cephalus, whose house this is all taking place in, says that he finds it easier to be just when he's old because all of his desires have gone away as he aged. All the things he used to want so badly that he would do bad things are gone now. He's lost any interest in them. And so he finds it very easy to be just because he just doesn't want to do bad things anymore. Because he doesn't want the things that he doesn't want the things that you have to do bad things to get. And so one thing that Plato might be thinking is, well, that's actually the best way to be just. The best way to be just is to eliminate in yourself any desires that tempt you into bad behavior. But he doesn't draw that parallel explicitly. That might mean that it's his real answer, but he's not going to give it because that would shorten the book, right? It would cut the book off at like the end of book 2 and he wanted to do all this other stuff. Or it could mean that he doesn't think that's a live possibility for most people. And the fact that he has Glaucon and Adeimantus say, no, we can't live this way, might be Plato's way of just acknowledging, look, this probably isn't psychologically possible for most people to get rid of their desires for all these things, right? Like nowadays, it would be to like completely drop off the grid, right? You'd go live in a cabin somewhere and you'd grow enough food for yourself to eat, right? You'd keep a goat, so you could milk the goat and make goat cheese for some protein or something like that. And you'd make your own clothes and that would be your life, right? I think Plato might just be thinking, sure, that's great if you can do it, but most people don't have that in them, right? Most people aren't going to be able to get rid of those desires. So we have to come up with a plan for life that involves dealing with the fact that you're going to desire things that are difficult to get. And because they're difficult to get, that leave you sort of in the grip of the temptations that might lead to unjust behavior. All right, so I think that's going to be the end of this video. I've explained the city and soul analogy. I've explained the healthy city and cynicism and things like that. The next video will be on the nature of the Kallipolis, the beautiful city, and what that has to tell us about the soul.